That's right. Out with the old and with the new. Just have somebody pull us off with a rope. Oh.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the November 8th meeting of the Ames Community School District Board of Directors. I will call the meeting to order and entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I so move. Second.
Moved by Acker, seconded by Benkin. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. And Director Acker, will you please read our purpose statement?
Certainly. The Ames Community School District commits to equity and access that empowers every individual to reach their full personal and educational potential.
Thank you. Our first item this evening is our COVID-19 update, and I will turn it over to Dr. Kathy Arnold.
Good evening, board. I'm going to go ahead and start, as usual, with our Story County data. Story County remains at a high level of community transmission. The most recent CDC numbers, which are coming very quickly here, there we go, is 160.6 total new cases per 100,000 persons in the past 7 days, which represents about a 22 case increase from our report 2 weeks ago. The 7-day positivity is 12.08, which represents about a 2% increase. As of the last IDPH report last Wednesday, 11% of the new cases in Story County are in those 0 to 17 years of age, which does represent about a 5% decrease from what we had seen in the previous report. Our overall increase in case count from listening to a CDC call today could be just that the colder weather driving people indoors, as well as some other activities that have been happening recently, like Halloween, although it's a little early for that. We do continue to see about a 0.5% increase in vaccination percentage every 2 weeks, and that's held up again for this 2-week period. So currently 57.2% of Story County residents are fully vaccinated, and an additional 3.7% are partially vaccinated. And then of that 12 and up group, it's 64.3% are fully vaccinated, with an additional 4% partially vaccinated. And CDC reported today that those 5 to 11-year-olds that are just now starting to be vaccinated, those numbers will be represented in their data probably as early as Wednesday of this week. So for our next report, that data will be included. On our next slide, it's our student and staff data. And at the time the report was prepared, we had 9 students and 0 staff members currently positive for COVID-19. So far this school year, we've had 121 total students positive and 24 staff positive since the beginning of our school year. And our data is holding very consistent that 62% of our cases in students are in that pre-K elementary. If you throw in 6th grade, it goes up to 72%. And our positives also echo that in our staff, that 67% of our positive cases in our staff are in that PK through elementary. 71% of the positives have been in breakthrough cases in fully vaccinated staff. I did want to share one de-identified case with our board and our community about specifically how COVID can and does impact children. We do have a student that did develop multi-system inflammatory syndrome, known as MISC, as a result of COVID, and spent weeks in the hospital, including a stay in the intensive care unit. The child has recovered, but and did not have any unknown underlying health conditions. I'm not going to share further details, obviously, to protect HIPAA and FERPA details with the case, but it's not an attempt to create fear or worry, but just an example that I felt important to show the impact that COVID does have and is having locally on children. On our next slide, you'll see some COVID-related vaccine updates. The good news slide, as it may be, we're going to be offering a COVID vaccination clinic for the 5 to 11-year-old group on this Saturday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. and the second dose will be on December 4th, same times and appointment times for each clinic. Appointments are required and there's about 216 spots available. This was sent to parents via Blackboard email this evening at 5:30, and it includes a Sign Up Genius link for to select an appointment time. With the way, when this was communicated, we sent translations for this in Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, and Vietnamese at the same time, all in one email. So that was communicated equitably to our community. Any questions on that clinic can be directed to our new vaccine clinic email, which is vaccineclinics@ames.k12ia.us. And finally, the last slide is regarding the OSHA Emergency Temporary Standard, or ETS, that was released on November 4th. It includes, which impacts any employer of 100 or more employees, and requires that employees provide either proof of vaccination or get tested on a minimum of once a week and wear a mask when indoors. Organizations are required to have a plan by December 6th, including records for vaccination status of all employees, some employee education, and then there's some other specifics in that as well. The vaccination or weekly testing requirement doesn't start until January 4th, but all the plans must be in place by December 6th. It is currently being challenged in the courts. Kristen Johnson and I have been meeting on this, and we're still moving forward with that plan just because it is a short turnaround time to have a plan established by December 6th. So we will bring that plan and our response to the requirements back to the next meeting, and we're going to keep moving with that until there is legislation ended on that. So that completes my report. What questions may I answer for you?
I just have a brief question about the this slide here. So who is required to pay for the weekly testing if it goes through?
I'm going to defer that one to Kristen, who's probably read the standard a little more. I don't.
It's not the employer.
It's not the employer, though we do have access as a Iowa Test Center to free testing. So as far as a cost, that is one option we've discussed, but I don't know, with the requirement, I don't believe it's our requirement to pay for that testing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
And what basis might exist in this regulatory environment for exemptions?
There are exemptions under the ETS for medical or religious, strongly held religious beliefs that are part of that. But that is for vaccination, then that would then still require testing on a weekly basis.
Mm-hmm.
And oh yes, and masks to be worn when indoors. Thank you.
Right. And would a doctor's statement or a religious whatever be required, or it's just the employee's own statement of belief or health condition?
And Kristen, can I defer to you on that one?
Check. Okay. The OSHA standard does not explain how that is to be confirmed. So in my opinion, that leaves room for us to be in compliance with the state law that does not allow us to make, inquire further other than for them to make the statement.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Arnold.
Thank you.
Do we have any comments from the public on our COVID-19 update? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to our discussion items. And we have our board committee update with the policy committee.
The policy committee, the meeting minutes are attached, but all of the policies are under the next discussion item.
Thank you.
And our next meeting, sorry, I guess our next meeting is Thursday. So,
are there any other board committee updates? Policies for discussion.
all right. So the substance-free workplace, that's just a minor adjustment based on IASB suggestions. The support staff reductions, again, based on IASB, it's a corrected legal references. 701.4, well, I guess we'll talk about that when it's under the action item. School property disposal, we just adjusted the amount from 5,000 to 25,000 in corrected legal references. and 903.1 school community groups. So we had two policies, 903.1A and 903.1B. One dealt with PTO, PTAs, and the other one dealt with booster clubs. IASB recommended that we combine them, and so now they are just in a general community groups policy. And again, the wording is based on their recommendation. And sales calls, it was recommended we delete it by our staff and the IASB review.
Yeah, I just had a little curious about the sales call rescinding. I assume that that is not intended to encourage sales calls, but it just was not felt to be necessary.
We all thought it would be a wonderful thing if it was enforceable.
Okay. Got it.
One general comment I would make about the policy committee, just thanking the staff because they are continuing to, it is a very organized strategic process that we are going through, and they're working to really get us caught up. So I appreciate the efforts from Superintendent Vincent and her staff, and JD is really managing some of the Excel spreadsheet behind it. But they're really keeping us moving forward to get some of these that we can move forward quickly in an efficient manner. So thank you.
Thank you. Any comments from the public on the policies for discussion? Seeing none, we will move on to the district communications plan, and we'll turn it over to Eric Smith.
Okay, thank you, Board, for this opportunity to talk about communications. Presenting tonight kind of started with a conversation that Dr. Vincent and I had about a strategic framework. And so I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about our department a little bit and communications. This is my 5th year in the district, and over the past several years, we've really taken concerted efforts to not only start some new communication strategies, but also revamp some of the ones that we already have. So one story in my very first year, as some of you may know, we were approaching a bond referendum at that time, and the superintendent at the time, Dr. Taylor, he said, "Eric, I want you to find that magic button where as soon as you hit it, then everyone in the community knows what's happening." I am here to tell you tonight that I have not found that magic button yet, but we are doing our best to reach our stakeholders. And so this circle here kind of looks at the 3 concentric circles that I often think about when it comes to communication. Of course, we have our internal staff, our employees, our students, and then we have, direct email access to some people in our community and our parents as well. But we also have a larger community that we also try to reach. And the reality is that as a school district, we have email addresses to our parents, but the vast majority of our community may not have a direct connection to our school district just because maybe, they had students that have already gone through our district or maybe don't have students yet. And so, we do think about that as well. In our communications plan, I wanted to anchor it on a few key things before we got into the strategies. And so I created some house rules that I oftentimes think about when it comes to communications. The very first one is one that I take a lot of pride in, and that is developing quality content. So I think anytime you look through the pieces that we develop as a district when it comes to communications, you're going to see photography, you're going to see the use of video, you're going to see graphics, you're going to see all of that align to brand standards as well. Tackling the tough stuff, this can be difficult at times, but I think it's necessary that as a school district, we do lean into conversations and topics, even if they are difficult at times. To be relevant means that, education is very known, as are many industries, for using acronyms and using phrases, and that, most people in education don't know what that means. So to be able to at sometimes maybe avoid using that jargon and educational language, or at least explaining it in the communication, is important. This next one was particularly difficult over the last year and a half, although we're starting to come out of it as well. And what I mean by that fourth bullet is, we put a lot of effort into our digital communications, but sometimes, you just have to meet in person and you have to have conversations about it. And so, as we all know, that was difficult. I mean, we experienced that as a school board as well, but, we're starting to come out of that a little bit more, where we can actually have in-person meetings and we can look at the people who we want to talk about and talk with, and hopefully we can get back to that and continue to take steps to get to that point. And then the last one is to be responsive. And this is something that as a district, at whatever level we are at, we do need to be responsive. We do need to email parents back. I mean, when I get an email with questions, we want to be responsive to that. And then one of the things that I personally think about is being responsive to our media as well. So we're going to take a look at some key strategies right away. We're going to look at district communication. So our website, it is a gateway for information. Oftentimes, it can be used as a repository for a lot of information, but for people who, are maybe interested in learning more about an organization, and that in our case is our school district, they will go to our website first. And so we take great pride in our website. We update it on a daily basis. We're always looking at ways to improve it. Our current website was developed in 2015. We have over 1 million page views on our website. And one of the interesting things as we were looking at some of the analytics is that a lot of that traffic is actually about 50% of that traffic is now mobile. And so it's not people, looking at our website on a computer, but they're looking at it on their phone. One of the things that we're currently doing right now is that we're redesigning our website. And so it's been a long process, and we're, inching away at it, but we're finally to the point where we do have access to start building content within our new website, and, it will be mobile responsive. And we also, in doing that, we looked at our data and our analytics on the back end, and we know why people go to our website. And so we're making those features a prominent part of that new website. This next piece, our magazine, this started in the year when we were doing our bond referendum, and we use this as a strategy to reach our community as a whole. So on a quarterly basis, one of the things that I'm really proud of is that although, with 85% approval rating, we went through the bond, this was a strategy and that we continued with. And it's something that we do take great pride in. I know that I do personally, but this is actually one of our key ways in which we can get information to our broader community on a quarterly basis. So we can share stories about what our students are doing, district initiatives. We're now working on our 17th edition of this magazine, and it's something that I do take great pride in. I actually saw a slide from a presentation, and this actually made me think of it. One of the things that I really do appreciate about the magazine is that it forces us to tell positive stories from our district. I think so often, we can get caught up on the nuts and bolts communication that we lose sight of some of the other things. The slide that I saw the other day, and it resonated with me when I was putting together this communication or this presentation, it says, when things get busy, the first thing that gets dropped is storytelling. Now, I don't know if it is the first thing, but I think for those of us who do have a responsibility to tell stories, you can get very caught up in, crisis communication or, the nuts and bolts stuff. But there's a lot of amazing things that do happen in our district, and I have to fill a magazine every 3 months, and I'm glad that I do have that responsibility to do that, because it does challenge and pushes me to find what those things are that we can talk about. One of the first things that I came on several years ago is that I wanted to put a lot of effort into our district social media. So, we had established accounts when I came on, and this is an interesting strategy in that anyone in our community, not just parents, not just, a certain population, but anybody can learn about the Ames Community School District if they choose to follow our social media accounts. It is an official form of communication, or at least that's the way I see it. Oftentimes, I hear this quite a bit actually, where you'll see, state or national leaders, or even, like pop culture celebrities, they make official statements through Twitter. And, and now we've gotten to the point where, in some ways, news releases aren't what they were, several years ago. People are officially announcing things on social media. I think one of the key things for social media is, you do want it to be engaging. So, we always try to use a graphic or photography or a video to draw people's attention to it because, I'm like everybody else, you can just, your thumb just gets moving when, you're on Twitter or Facebook, and you can miss a lot of information, on social media as well. So it certainly isn't something that we use in isolation, but we use it as a companion piece to other forms of communication. And the key to social media is that it needs to be a reliable source of information. And one of the best ways that you can do that is to regularly post to it. And so, as a district, I post to our district social media accounts of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We did just launch a LinkedIn channel as well. We post to those weekly, sometimes multiple times a day. And so it is a source that if people want to find information about our school district, this is one way that they can do it. And then the graph on there just shows the last 2 years of the people who have liked and what I see as follow our Facebook page. So, you can see that continuous growth. And then one of our more recent strategies was to launch a podcast. So each episode is about 25 to 30 minutes long. I always see this as our bonus communication. So I try to do 10 a year, about 1 a month. Sometimes, there's a little bit more of a gap in between each episode, and then sometimes there's a smaller gap. We fit them in as we can, but we are regularly doing them. We're currently in our 3rd season. And the way this podcast came on was just through conversations with colleagues in that some conversations, some topics, they require more of a conversation. And so it's not just, I can write a story or write a couple paragraphs and post it onto our website, but it's a little back and forth. It doesn't always have a neat conclusion. And so we launched this podcast in that way. One of the really neat things that we started right away was we videotaped each one of them. And so what I really wanted to do is, it's one thing to be able to listen to topics. I always thought it would be very cool to also be able to see those people talking and see the passion of them talking on a particular topic. A couple other forms of communication is, as a director team in this building, we meet several times a week. And one of the best things when we started doing that was during COVID. One of the best things for it was each department got to see what other departments were doing and working on. And it was, we've continued those on today, but it really is great to be able to meet and connect and see what other departments are doing. And what we quickly found out was there was a lot of crossover between the departments. And so getting feedback from departments that maybe you didn't think you'd get feedback from proved to be really valuable. Additionally, we have administrative meetings. So not only do we meet as a director team in this building, but, we have all of our buildings. We meet regularly as well. And so it's a great way for us to share information with them, but also they can share their perspective from the building as well. And then, we're doing it here right now. This school board meeting is another form of communication. One of the great things, and I applaud this board for doing it, was introducing Zoom into this. That's proved to be really popular, really successful, and I'm actually glad that we are continuing to do it because I think we have a lot of engagement with this type of communication. There's a lot of conversations that happen here that don't happen anywhere else. And so it's nice that we're able to broadcast them and then get feedback as well. So communication is not just myself. I know I've talked a lot about, our department, but it is something that we are always looking at across the district. So, we look at it out of this building from a systems level, but, our buildings are looking at it as well too. And so we do have, shared communication responsibilities. For example, if Kristen in HR has information that needs to get to our staff, she communicates that to our staff. And then parent communication is a shared responsibility. I have things that I share with all of our parents from a district perspective, but each building also has the autonomy to send things to parents as they see necessary. And so it's, keeping our parents in the loop. It is essential. One of the ways that we did support our buildings just this last year is we moved to a Blackboard mass notification system. And so we do onboard our building administrators and secretaries on how to use that, and we continue to support them in that way. A couple other district responsibilities, and these are things that do fall with, primarily myself, but, with everything I'm working with the superintendent, but media relations, they run through me, crisis communication. And then I'm not going to really dive into this point because there's a separate presentation on it later today, but translation communications, that is something that we do handle as a district as well. And then the school board meetings was just my copy and paste it. So when we look at, and this is a little bit of a snapshot, we talked about stakeholders and how we think about hitting different parts of our stakeholders, our internal staff, our community as a whole. Here's a look at what it can look like throughout the year. So these are just examples. It's not an all-inclusive list, but on a weekly basis, parents are getting emails. We're updating our website, social media. Then we moved to monthly. We did start a staff newsletter. Podcasts are much more on a monthly basis. Media inquiries, that ebbs and flows, but we pretty consistently get requests on a monthly basis, sometimes more regularly. And then we have our broader communication strategies as well, where our magazine lands into that. And then also, and I'm using this opportunity, to talk about our department here, but we play a supportive role as well. In many ways, we're the gatekeeper for some information, but we play a supportive role for other departments across our district as well. And so, kindergarten registration, we don't do the heavy lift on that, but we do help package and organize the public-facing part of that. With graphics and some language and some of the, technology needs around it. And so, here's a list of just a few other ones that, may not be our project to lead, but we're certainly supporting as well. And then I just also wanted to use this other opportunity to briefly talk about just other areas that, I particularly have passion around. One of them, I presented to the board prior, but, we do integrate pretty strongly with our branding. I think having a strong brand across the district is really important, and I proudly serve as that point person for that. Sort of the part B of that project was our online apparel store. It's really a way for our community, if they so choose, to have Ames School District apparel and to be able to show that point of pride for them. And then lastly, and this is the really kind of my side project for my job, but I think it's hugely important. I've loved looking at the history of our school district. We have 150 years of a history, and so there's a lot there to unpack. And so we just do a little bit at a time. And so you'll always know when I'm working on a little bit of history stuff if you follow our social media, because I usually pull stuff together and then, we share it out. And then there may be a month, that goes by where you don't see anything. And then, we pick at it a little bit more, but it is really cool to be able to see the history of our school district. And then finally, I did include, our communications plan. It is on our website, and it was in the board packet for this presentation as well. But, there are always barriers to communication as well. Engagement being one of them. I joke, but I'm 100% serious when I tell people this, that, I'm the communications director when I sit, behind my desk. I'm also the parent that doesn't read those emails from buildings. And so I fully understand and acknowledge how that can happen. But we really are we are in an attention type culture right now. I mean, there's Netflix and Disney Plus that can, get our attention. There's social media that can get our attention. Our parents are running their kids around, every day, and emails can get lost. And so we really try to diversify and our communication strategy, but also I do try to include some reminders. I mean, I know as a parent, I need those reminders, like just make it easy for me, and so that's probably the one piece of feedback that, we always are looking at, how can we make it easier for our parents to get the information that they want? I acknowledged, the avoiding industry jargon already. One of the challenging things that we do always run into as well is not providing enough information. And, I've heard the feedback, I know the feedback in that, recently we've had to do some hold in places at, a couple of our buildings. And I know that there's a desire and to want to know more information. And I get it. When I put my parent hat on, I do get that, because you just want to know that your students are safe. And then when I put my other hat on, I also acknowledge that, talking about, any type of student discipline or personnel issues are just things, that you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube when you do that. So, we are very aware of that. And that's difficult. Those are difficult decisions to make, but I put that hat on when we do that. Different communication styles. I think, that was the bulk of this presentation. We try to share information in a variety of ways. And then this language barrier, before I turn my mic on and before we get to the next presentation, I do want to acknowledge the work that, Amy and Shaylee have been doing on this next piece, and they're going to go into in their presentation. But it's a really heavy lift and it's a lot of work, and they're both very passionate about it. So when you get to that presentation, know that that is one part of our department, and we partner with the equity department on that I feel as though we've made great strides over the last year and a half. So with that, I am happy to entertain any questions.
I don't have any questions, but I do want to say I've seen the communications evolve through the years, and I think it's where it is now from where it started is just light years ahead. I really appreciate the effort and the work. It looks really good.
Well, thank you. I like hearing that feedback as well.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Did I hear you say that when you're revamping the website, you can look to see what people are trying to find most often? So
Yep.
you can put that. That's excellent.
Yes, and we've made those, kind of keeping some of it under wraps, right now, because it's going to be a point of celebration for us. It's a pretty big difference in the work that we're doing, but the four big areas that people oftentimes it's nuts and bolts things, like they just like, how do I find where my school lunch is? Like, how do I know that? How can I pay on RevTrak? We're going to make stuff like that really easy to find.
Well, as a parent, the one thing I couldn't find the other day was the online absence form.
Okay.
So. I found it.
Yeah.
The other thing you didn't really mention this. You talked about having many different forms of communication for different for the way people try to get different information, right? Because we have so much coming at us all the time.
Yeah.
But are you making it accessible for different types of people? Like if they, need to listen to it because they can't read, or is that also something that you're keeping in mind as you're changing some of your formatting?
Yes, equally as I can't speak to it as well as I would like to be able to, but fortunately, Amy, who oversees our website, is very passionate about accessibility, and so it is always on her list. So yes.
And the last question I have, do you try to answer questions on social media, or is that just too big an ask for you to try to manage social media in that way?
I will say that I oftentimes do not engage in social media, the back and forth. There was for a while, when it was a very, where do I find this? Is this accurate? Is that accurate? Those are easy things to respond to. I've made it the norm, and I think it's an ongoing conversation, but I've made it the norm for our district social media to be primarily a one-way communication tool. I could go deeper in that if you want me to, but
No, I think it'd be incredibly time consuming
Yeah.
to try to manage all that. So, as a public service announcement for people who have questions and post them on social media,
Yeah.
what's the best way for them to get the answers they need?
The best way would be to email, or call a building that would have the direct answer to that. If it's a particular department, then that's the easiest way to do it. Did that, okay.
Yeah.
I will say one other thing, and, I didn't note it in the presentation, but the ongoing challenge with some social media platforms, some are better than others, but on some social media platforms is the commenting. And so we have been advised, and it's our practice to not delete comments. We are a public institution, and so I do not delete comments. I can probably over the course of the 4.5 years that I've been here, under 10 comments have I deleted on our social media, and usually those would include any types of comments that are directly attacking an individual or cursing. And so those I don't have tolerance for, but outside of that, if it's opinion as challenging of an opinion and as it may read, we don't delete.
Thank you.
I don't really have a question. I just want to thank you because I like, because it's tricky you're a cheerleader, but also you have to kind of reflect what's happening. Like you were saying with the same place, that people want information, but you can give it. So it's a tricky balance for you. And I feel like you've done it good justice for that balance that you're having to do with how cheerful do we look in this way and how. So I think that's a tricky balance that we don't do, right? But I can see it from when I put my school board hat on, sometimes I get all these emails that people are not happy about something, but then I go to the Facebook and there's this video of art from high schoolers. It's just okay, recenter yourself. This is why we're doing this. So all of this is happening at the same time. So I like how you are working with all of that and doing justice with what's happening. So I thank you. In that video, if you haven't seen it, it's brilliant. My whole family, we watched it together and we were smiling and we were gasping. It was so beautiful. And I love that you're doing that in different forms, like the podcast that you can just listen to it or watch it. You're doing a great job. And I hope you continue to grow in this role as you have.
Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing I would say is that I would agree with Jeanette and go even further. As you said, the telling of the stories of Ames Community School District, I think is really important. I mean, I love the podcast series. That's awesome. If I had any suggestion or feedback, it would be kind of to dig into that more. And I know your bandwidth is an issue, but when I look at some of the things throughout the district, I mean, there are other people within our staff and there are students that maybe they could tell some stories and you could be kind of the medium to help get those out, because like the art and things like that, getting more of that type of thing out so our students can show off and tell their stories would be excellent.
One student did reach out to me just in the last couple weeks asking about podcasting. So we're going to connect. They were looking at doing it through their club at the high school. So
yeah,
we'll help support them that way.
Yeah, I love those stories as they get out. That's excellent and great.
Isn't that called a takeover? Where people take over your social media? In a good way.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Eric. And I echo everything everyone said. We're appreciative of all the work you do. And thanks for presenting for us tonight. Okay, we will move on to teaching and learning. And we'll start with the ISOP parent reports and data review with Erin Miller.
Well, good evening. Thanks for having us this evening. I'm here with Erin Weeks, so you can just say Erin, and we're happy to answer questions. We're going to start tonight talking, we have kind of three purposes of our presentation right now, and then you probably saw that in the work session, we're going to do a deeper dive into the data. So our purposes right now are to kind of discuss the purpose of ISASP and remind folks what it is, what it's not, and then talk about the information we sent home to parents in the last couple of weeks for individual scores, and then we'll do kind of a high-level district data overview so you can see it here, and then we'll do a deeper dive into like the what and the how and the whys in the work session. So that might help you structure where to ask questions, but you're welcome to ask us anything, and don't hesitate, even if you want to interrupt. We'll try to pause a couple times because there's kind of a lot here to unpack. So, okay. We're going to start with just a reminder of what ISASP is. So ISASP is the Iowa Statewide Assessment of Student Progress. And the definition there is from the ITEST guide or ISASP guide. And so you can see that it says that it includes individual assessments in English language arts, mathematics, and science, intended for use within the last 12 weeks of the academic year. These summative assessments measure student achievement, growth, and college and career readiness based on the Iowa core standards. So if you look on the next slide, it'll give you just a reminder that a summative assessment is something that's supposed to be comprehensive. It's supposed to be at the end. It's supposed to kind of sum up all their learning, right? So we talk about lots of different assessment types, and you've seen on our assessment plan, lots of different assessment types. So this is kind of the big one at the end of the year. Any questions about that? What ISASP is? So what I wanted to kind of talk about next is you'll see we're working, one of our future projects is sort of like a look past on our data over the last kind of 10 years, and you'll see that we have really different assessments that the state has asked us to give over time. So some of you might remember that we changed assessments in the 2018-2019 school year. And you might remember that the state of Iowa underwent a review where they said, gosh, Iowa assessments that we've given for almost 10 years doesn't actually measure any of the standards that we say it does. And so we need a new test. And so there was a couple of years of a couple different rounds of vendors and drama. And anyway, we ended up with the ISASP. That's our new test. So we've actually only given it twice. The first was in 18-19, and then we gave it again last year. We didn't give it in 19-20 because of COVID. So when you see the data, you'll wonder, if you were wondering where's the missing year, that's where it went. So I just wanted to take a minute and just sort of review the old Iowa assessments and the differences so you can understand when you're looking at the data really what you're looking at. The old Iowa assessments were multiple choice. So you might remember your kids taking them on bubble sheets, or maybe you took some tests on bubble sheets, right? So they were multiple choice. They were really low depth of knowledge. So they were just asking you kind of literal questions to recall, right? So to remember, what is this, really factual types of things. It was a norm reference test. So it told you, like, if you had 100 kids, right, and you were at the 49th percentile, that really only meant that you were tested higher than 48 other kids and lower than 51 other kids, but it didn't tell you anything about how you did on the test, other than relative to other kids, how you did. So that's norm referenced. And then as you heard me say, it wasn't actually aligned to the Iowa teaching standards we were asking to be teaching to. So those were the main reasons they moved away. ISASP, one of the really cool things about ISASP, which we're going to talk about in the work session too, is that there are multiple response types. So it's not just multiple choice. It's on the computer. Kids do some writing, some extended writing, even essays in high school. They are asked to justify their thinking. Even in the math sections, they might be asked, why did you, not only give the answer, but justify your thinking. Why did you give that answer? How did you come up with the answer? So it's a much deeper levels of knowledge, right, that they're trying to measure on ISASP than on Iowa assessments. Criterion reference, so you're going to see in the parent reports that you're actually going to get a scale score that lets you know that's stable over time, right? So you can see if your student is actually improving on the test, not relative to other students. right? So it's criteria reference. And then the celebration, if you're thinking about systems alignment, is that it is actually tied to Iowa core standards. And in the parent reports that you'll see in just a little bit, it actually tells you some of the big buckets of standards that we teach and how your student did on those particular standards. So,
Erin,
yeah.
could you please go back and just reiterate the criterion referenced again and just
Yeah,
describe
so
that
it'll
again?
give you like an actual score of how many you got right on the test. So the norm referenced is just how much better you did than other kids, didn't really tell you how many questions you got right. The criterion reference is if there are 10 questions, you got 7 right, and here's your scale score. So it gives you that way to compare across different years of taking the test. So one of the things, well, I'm giving all away of our slides, I'm giving them all away. But you'll be able to see your student's assessment history over time on this test, assuming Iowa sticks with this test. Other questions about the differences between the old test we used to give and the new one we're talking about now?
How do they score responses?
That's a
When
great
they
question.
can-
So
when
a
they
lot of them are auto scored, like the computer scores them, but there are actual human readers who score the essays and the extended written.
So when they score them, are they looking for certain things to be included in their response?
Yes,
Okay.
yep, absolutely. We'll talk about those.
Okay.
Yep. There's a rubric they use.
Okay.
And Iowa teachers were the ones who, they did like an open call. Teachers could sign up, for lack of a better word. I think they wanted lots of people to be involved who got to contribute what might be on the rubrics and what might be important to look for as it relates to the standards at each grade level. So, yeah.
And just for background, Erin, where did this test come from? Is it developed on a contract with the Iowa Department of Education? I mean, ITBS was sort of famous for being nationally.
Yep,
used,
ISAS
but
was
this
actually,
sounds specific.
yep, developed with a partnership with Pearson. And it did go through the Iowa Department of Education, but Pearson is the main vendor behind it. Other questions about what it is? Okay, we're going to switch over to the parent report so you can just give you a little bit more information about what you can learn about your student.
Check, are we okay? Okay, great. One more comment about Pearson. Pearson also contracts with multiple other states for their state summative assessments as well. So Minnesota, Illinois, other states use them as well for their state assessment. So the ISAS is specific to Iowa, aligned with Iowa core standards, but they do create other tests with other states.
I can assume that what we need to know in Iowa is not completely different from what people need to know elsewhere.
One would think.
Yeah.
All right, so what we're going to go through now is we're going to go through kind of a sample student report of what, an ISAS report looks like. So we as a district this year, so Pearson, and working with the Iowa Department of Education, released the parent portal so that parents can view their students' results online and get a really in-depth view of those results and get, tutorials on, okay, well, what does that mean? And what does this mean? And explain this a little bit more in depth. And I got this color chart and I don't know what it means, right? We also worked to send out copies to families who took the test remotely, as the remote test is a different test than the test that students took in person. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the reason that was due to security concerns. We couldn't have students taking one test in person, another one online at home. So the data that we're going to go through later on is our in-person testing data. We are looking into our remote data as a district. It is a little bit more challenging to access as it is not included in that necessarily in the sort of pre-done Iowa State reports. We have to do it ourselves because it's a different test that they took, if that makes sense. It scores the same things, but it was a different test. So on our first slide here, we have a sample, just a sort of front page of what a student report would look like for English language arts, right? So we see what the scale score for the student, what they tested, and what their achievement level is. So achievement levels would be not proficient, proficient, or advanced. That's based on how the student assessed. So for English language arts, that's a combination of reading, language, and writing, right? So all of those are put together in a combined scale score for this one topic. We see for this particular sample student, they tested right there in the middle of proficient, right? That's on their scale score. If we were to look at their, sort of history over time, maybe next year we might see that, hopefully that meter move up for that student, right, toward either on the higher end of proficient or toward advanced. That's what we'd like to see. We'd like to see that needle move to that right-hand direction. But what this would mean is that this student, at least currently, at the time of this test, tested proficient on those skills. We would consider them to be at grade level for that cumulative assessment. That make sense?
You just said that you wanted to see it move up to advanced, but if it's at grade level, why?
So for a student,
proficient at their grade level always be set, like.
The scale scores adjust per year, so it's a different test for every grade. So as a student moves up in a grade, right, moves on, yep, so move on. As a student moves to the next grade, sorry, we're skipping ahead here. Okay, so as we see here, so this is a sort of historical look, right? So this is an example of a student who tested in grade 4 and grade 6. So for instance, 2 years ago, if we had a 4th grader, right, didn't test in 5th grade because of COVID, tested in 6th grade, we see those domains shift, right? The scale score for proficient gets higher. And so obviously what we would want to see is that student's little white star, right, to continually move to the right as those scale scores get larger. They may or may not go that way, but that's what we would like to see. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. So we're just directing traffic over here. So we were talking, yep, great. Nope, okay. We were talking about domains. So this is an example of domain scores for English language arts. So for reading and for language writing, we talked about those two separate areas. So those domains we see listed there under the list. So for reading, we have 3 for this particular sample grade. For language and writing, we have 5 for this particular grade. And what we see is based on those green bar graphs and the percentages there, what percentage of questions in that particular domain this student got correct, right? Thank you, Eric. So for this particular student, 82% correct questions and key ideas and details, right? That seems to be their strongest area in reading. Whereas in craft and structure and integration of knowledge and ideas, we're a little bit lower. So maybe for a teacher or for a building, we might look at those trends and say, okay, well, where can we improve? Right? Well, where can we, sort of meet some of those challenges? Down in language and writing, we have the same sort of idea. Oh, sorry, one thing I want to mention is those black dots, right? That is the relative norms for either, depending on what report you're looking at, for the state or for the district, right? So that's where the state or the district is compared to that student. So for this particular student, scoring really well in reading, sort of better than a significant number of their peers, and language and writing, maybe we have some areas that we could work on. Any other questions?
So that mark is the mean, it's not the expectation.
Yeah, okay. Correct. Thanks. All right, so and this would be an example of math. They're the same kind of thing, right? We have those domain scores. We see the percentages, and we see where that student is reflected to their peers. One thing that's worth noting, and we kind of touched on this, that we have different tests for different grades. Those domains will change, right? Versus maybe an elementary mathematics test versus a middle school mathematics test versus a high school mathematics test. So those domains may be different as we move on in grades.
I covered this one, so I'm going to skip to the next one here. So we talked about this just a little bit, but there's a rubric that goes along with the writing test, right? So as we start out with third graders, because you remember 3rd grade is the first grade that we take this test. They're asked to write more of an extended paragraph. By the time we get up to high school, they're writing full essays in the writing sample. So they fill out the rubric, so their essays are judged on these 4 big categories. So the first thing is, did they answer the question? So prompt to task, like did they actually answer the question that was asked of them? How well did they develop their argument over time? What was their organization like? And then their language use, was that appropriate? Did that meet the grade level standards for language use in that essay? So that the rubric identifiers are on the ISAS website, and we could dig into those during the work session if you're curious, but they have those, and then their scorers who score them over this spring so that they can give essay scores. So again, we were saying that these were sample student reports, so you could see this student's argument was really strong, they maybe didn't quite answer the question, could work on their organization, right? So these are things that we can really dig into at the teacher level. At the parent level, if this were my student, I might think, gosh, I read with them all the time, but I really don't ever ask them to do any writing at home. So maybe I need to start asking my daughter to journal a little bit about her particular day, right? And so there are things that you could partner with your student's teacher about, like if there are things you want to ask about from a home standpoint, these would be things that you could look at and have a conversation with the teacher about. And then just the last thing, we talked a little bit about the depth of knowledge and that this was a more involved test. So it will also give you your students' depth of knowledge question analysis, right? So again, the first depth of knowledge is sort of the recall level, like the factual level there. And then it goes into conceptual understanding and then that extended reasoning where I was talking about like justify your answer. There's more complex thinking in those sorts of questions. So again, they'll give you a score of how many of this type of question did your student get right in this bucket. And so there would be students who might score in any number of ways across the different buckets and in the different content areas. So you can kind of see. You'll notice this one doesn't have a breakdown for science. So you might remember we take science only 3 times. Once in elementary, 5th grade. That's great, thank you. 8th grade in middle school and 10th grade in high school. So your student might not have science, and that would be why they don't have science. Okay, so before we dig into the charts about the district level results, what other questions do you have about the test?
So the results, as presented this way, have you gotten any feedback from parents in the district about whether or not it was understandable, gave them the right information they wanted, anything like that?
Not yet, but I'm sure when we get together with the building principals, the teachers, I'm guessing the teachers got the feedback because we just sent it out. Have you gotten anything?
No, I've heard from some families, they really like the online version to be able to see more in-depth information about it. That's the little bit of feedback that I've gotten. I haven't gotten a lot of other feedback simply because for me, not a lot of the folks communicate with me directly. So I have to wonder, we would absolutely talk to, building administrators and see what they're hearing from families, because I imagine that they're going to have a little bit more information on that.
You mentioned you hope as time goes on, students will increase their proficiency level as they move from grade to grade. Are the tests intended to be to provide the same degree of challenge as you go along, or are they harder tests as the students age up?
Yeah, so they are aligned to each grade level standards. So the standards increase in rigor as you go and complexity, and so the test each year will be more complex.
So improving proficiency, really it takes some big leaps because you are doing better on a more rigorous assessment.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, then we will go on to the next set of slides. So on the next set of slides, we've really focused on the district level results. So we have in the Google folder that I think hopefully got shared with the agenda, building level results, and we have lots of different breakdowns in there. So for this presentation, we're going to stick at the district level, but we have those and we can get into them at the work session a little bit later on in the deeper dive. So I wanted you to have this slide as a reference. So this, I'm going to take a minute and just kind of explain this slide because this is how the rest of them are structured. But we have this is the state level results across Iowa. So you can kind of see how we compare to the state. You'll see that the not proficient percent is in yellow, the proficient percent is in blue, and then kind of an orange color there for the advanced percent. You'll see that the first set of tests is English language arts, then math, then science, and you'll remember that the science are only those 3 grade levels, so it's a small. And then you'll see that it's the 18-19 school year first, and then the 2021 school year because we didn't test in 19-20. Okay. So that's kind of how the rest of the slides break down. So you can see that across the state, the trends are that in language arts, the state maybe lost 1% in proficiency, but it's pretty comparable. In math, that there were 5% more students not proficient. And then in science, actually, there were more students proficient by about 4%.
Aaron, are these actual numbers or are these sample numbers?
No, these are actual numbers.
Okay, thank
This
you.
is what the state released.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Great question, because we've been talking about samples for so long. This is actual numbers.
And this is on the state or district, when you say percentage proficient, like 18, 19, it would have been, that's the percentage of the population that took it. Everybody would have taken it, or as many as you were successful in getting to complete it. But then 2021 for the state or the district level, these are only students that were physically in the school buildings at that moment that took. So
That's correct.
ELA 2021, that's 28% of that population. It's not
Yes,
including
that took
number
the
of people.
test.
Okay.
So for our local numbers, that's, I think, about I'm gonna misquote the number, 500 roughly kids that didn't take the in-person test.
Can you repeat that?
It's about 531 that we have the remote results for.
Okay.
Numbers are my job, right? So that's part of the reason why, but we also have to consider that of those tests, there were some students who took one subject and not another. There were some students who maybe didn't actually complete the test in its entirety because of remote testing, because of a number of constraints. So there's some nuance to that we're trying to work out before we can be confident in the fidelity of presenting the results.
So what would if there were you said 530 remote, so how many then? I'm just curious what the difference is. How many then do we have that actually took it?
More than 2,000.
And is there a percentage of students that didn't take it at all? Do you have that?
We do have a percentage of some students who didn't test. It's somewhat complicated by the fact that some groups of students are not required to test, but some still do. So some of our homeschool students are not required to test, but some of them still test. Our dual enrolled students are not required to test, but some of them still test. So it gets a little bit complicated to get that number exactly right.
I would say it's pretty small typically.
Yes, it's usually a pretty small number. We had, our buildings really hustled to try to get absolutely every student and get every test completed. And I really have to commend them because I know that it wasn't easy.
So what's on the screen right now then is the district level summary. So you'll see again, English language arts, math and science, and then you'll see the 2-year comparison, but going back to the 18-19 school year. So you can see the district trends mirror the state trends in a lot of places. All right, I'm going to do the next step.
Okay. So we as a district are trying to always make sure that we're disaggregating data and looking at individual student sets because it can sometimes tell us different stories. So this is our English language arts results broken down by race and ethnicity. So we see again from left to right, 18-19 versus 2021. We do have some groups that are not represented as the N was too small, the number of students is too small and therefore can be identifiable. But we do as a district still have that information. Our students perhaps who are American Indian or Pacific Islander, but they're not included on this chart. So from left to right, we have our Asian students, our Black and African American students, Hispanic and Latinx students, white students, and students of 2 or more races. This is that same information, but for the mathematics test. And again, that same information about science. Any questions about the breakdown by these groups? We do have some more slides about some other groups that we looked at.
So looking at that data, it seems like it matches what MAP and FAST said as far as which demographics had the gaps widen. FAST and MAP actually said that the gaps widen even further than this, though. Do you have an explanation for that? I mean, why? I mean, I remember the FAST data, the gap massively widened.
Yeah, I don't know that I have an explanation other than, so one wonder, I have some wonders and some deficits. So one wonder I have is that we did MAP allowed us to test all of our remote campus students as well. And ISAS doesn't count those students in here. So that's a wonder I have, right? And like Erin said, it's been a challenge to get the ISAS remote students in there. It also is interesting to me that this is an end of year benchmark, like measuring standards, and MAP is more of a screener. So it's a different bar and it's measuring different things. So that's a wonder I have, like, is there something going on about the test? Those are wonders that I have. Fast. Oh, fast, I apologize.
Well,
So-
both. I mean,
Yeah,
both.
sure. So I remember the FAST data that we presented last fall, the one screener information from fall. That was a fall assessment. We have to consider that was a screener for one time in the year. The FAST does give us 3 screeners throughout the year that was fall. And this is, like I said, a very different test. This is a summative assessment, which provides a very different set of results than that test is. Obviously, they both give us good information that we can use, and if there's similar information in both of those, it can really give us some good information to use. But I would say that they're measuring different things.
One of the observations, I think, and challenges probably as a school district is you hope with particularly this annual kind of summative assessment that you get feedback on how are you doing as a system, and you can look at that trend over time. I think it's fair to say at this point, we still are in need of trend line data, because what we have is you can't really even compare 19 to 21 because they're different populations. So we are still struggling to get that trend to see the change. At the same time, that said, if this is where we are, I think it's pretty clear where our challenges are and where our attention needs to be. But you would hope that we could absolutely move some of those numbers over time, particularly where we see the discrepancies among different populations.
Well, respectfully, I would say these numbers look very familiar to me, right? I mean, certainly it's not the same test, but I'm thinking back to the equity report we did, and was it 2017? What year was? I mean, I'm looking at page 18, it's near identical. I mean, the Asian students have been carrying this district for, over a damn decade, right? And so, I mean, to me, this seems very familiar. Like, I think you could do a trend line just because it's what we've been seeing. Certainly the disparities in our Black and brown students is getting worse. But I mean, to me, I would be surprised if we couldn't trend line these data. It just seems very consistent.
And I think something that also is suggested by these figures is that the remote learning year of COVID did not have the impact that we might have thought. I mean, our results are, with a few exceptions, they are relatively consistent across groups. So I mean, it's not necessarily a shortfall that was the result of that year of disruption.
One thing I would also note, I'm sorry if I could interject, is that we did have we are sort of specifying that this is a lot of our in-person students. We did have some remote students come in to test in person. It's a relatively small number, but that is something that happened, that some buildings really tried to make happen, especially our young learners. Our buildings tried really hard to get those remote students come in to test because they thought it would be extremely difficult for, say, a 3rd grader to test remotely. They really made an effort. Do you have any other questions about breaking down by these groups? No? Okay. So we also took a deeper dive into some of our selected programs. So specifically special education, our students on free and reduced lunch meal plans, and our English language learners. So this is the English language arts test broken down by those groups comparative to 18-19 to 2021.
Did you not look at ELP?
We did not. We could.
I guess I'm just wondering, like I'm looking at slide 20 and 21, and I'm wondering what the overlap is, because I'm seeing, some orange, and I'm wondering, surely those students are, in ELP, or I'd just be curious to know how
Sure.
those, where the overlap is.
There's always I appreciate you bringing that up. There is always the sort of danger when we do break down data like this into groups that we will silo that data and think that all of these groups are separate from one another. And that's, as we know, not necessarily true, especially when we consider some of these programs, there's almost certainly overlap. So that's a really good consideration. So yes, and then we broke, as you see on the following slides, we have it broken down by the math test as well and science.
I guess I'm curious on these, on 20 and 21, about legal implications. Like I know that when you have students who have IEPs and 504s, and I will not get it right, but I mean, there are laws that apply to like how they have to be progressing. Am I right? I mean, like I guess I look at this slide and I'm wondering about legal implications.
Certainly, I mean, we could get some perspective on that from our director of special education or from other folks. One thing I will say when we look at this, when we break this down by the state data, when we look at these same groups, we see a very similar picture. And that's not making a value judgment. It's a similar picture. So I wonder if some of the challenges and some of the things that we're dealing with here are also being dealt with in other districts as well.
I also think when we're thinking about special education students, students with IEPs, the IEP teams meet to discuss specific progress monitoring data points that they're going to look at, and it's rarely ISAS. It's usually something that's more sensitive to change over time, and so those progress monitoring tools, I know that Director Thomas monitors closely the progress that students are making. So I think they rarely use ISAS in that way.
But I mean, if they're not proficient, and they're progressing, but still not proficient. Like this is what tells us if a student is proficient or not. Is that right?
Well, so according to the state, yes, this is one data point on one day, right? So that's the other thing is that when we're thinking about this, it gives us a good kind of feel for how the district is doing and where we aren't doing well. But to tie like an individual student's to tie all of their words or progress onto this one data point on one day. I don't know that that's something that an IEP team would advocate for. So they're usually talking about multiple data points that are taken every other week that do convergent data so that we can look at really how is this child doing, not just on this one test. But
so that's kind of a more holistic approach you're advocating for, yeah. Like within the district.
I think that's happening. You were talking about special education students, and so that's where my mind was, that those teams are really working that way. And I think, like I was having a conversation with some of our elementary principals about the progress report. So that's another piece of data that's coming out. How do we communicate with parents? What does it mean to be, getting making progress towards the standards? What it means to get a proficient on the progress report at the elementary level, and what sort of data would we love to see? And our elementary teachers already doing really well at looking at multiple data sorts. We're talking about what's the body of evidence that the teacher would look at to make a determination, not just one assessment. So they really want to look holistically to see, is the student reading on grade level? And can they demonstrate that across multiple experiences? So for sure, ISAS is a piece of information, right? And it's how the state judges us. I'm not trying to dismiss that in any way, but I try to keep that in my mind.
Well, I was going to ask that. I just had two quick follow-up questions, and because this is what, when we go to the Iowa State report card, this is what will be reflected there, right?
It has embedded in it Alpha 21's our English learner proficiency test as part of that as well, and then our conditions for learning survey. That's the other piece. But yes, most of the academic data is from this test.
Because what I hear you saying, what slide are we on? I think we're on the same side. So let's just take that top line, 72.
sorry.
Yeah. So, 72% of those students are not proficient. I'm just looking at that first line. Well, let's look at the bottom line, because it's 2021. 75% of those students are not proficient.
Right.
But what I hear you saying is, but if we had tested in the next day, 75% could be proficient. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying, so I would imagine that that number, probably the next day aren't going to magically be proficient, but I am saying that I wouldn't want to make individual student programming decisions, right? So this allows us to look as a system and saying that we're not serving our special education students well in the area of math, it looks like, according to this chart, right? But if I was talking about Aaron in an IEP meeting, I wouldn't want to make a decision just on that one data point, right? Like, does that make sense?
Well, how big of a piece of the pie would this be?
I think it would be a part of it, but I would want to combine it with like the FAST data or the MAP data, depending on how old Aaron is. I would want to talk to the classroom teacher and see how they were doing on their classroom assessments. And I would want to get that bigger picture before I made programming decisions, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Helpful.
Do we have, I'm looking at the EL learners, and that's a big jump.
There's one of the groups that jumped that large.
Yes. Do we have, so what is the number of, do we have a number of students that took it 1 year and then the next? Is there a similar number? That is just a big number.
Yes, for sure. I don't know if I have the actual student enrollment numbers from one test year to another in front of me, so I don't want to speculate on that. But those are awesome questions for our work session, if that's
Yeah,
okay.
of course. Yeah.
Okay. The questions that we can answer now for you. So I think that's the end of our presentation, actually.
So I think you said this, the state is not planning to compile the remote data. They will only be reporting for somebody said it, the Iowa School Report Card. I know this is part of it. That will only be on the students that were face-to-face, did the ISAS.
To our knowledge, is what's been communicated at this point, yes.
And like Aaron said, the students who took it face-to-face. So we did have some families who.
No, yeah. Just the testing, who was testing face-to-face. How's that all?
Yes.
The state has been explicit in saying that remote testing results will not be included in our performance profile.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to that, Elisa, that's why I asked about the students that didn't take it at all. If we knew, because we talked about students not showing up to class or being disengaged. And I wonder if that is a connection that can be made, or it's just parents that decided or students that decided. So I wonder if there's a number that can be kind of unpacked.
Yeah, if we can chase that down.
Yeah, just a bit.
Yeah, we can see what we can do about chasing that down.
I appreciate you breaking the data down by disaggregating the data. I appreciate that, because if you look at slide 15, I guess it is, you're like, okay, but then when you break them down, you're like, oh boy. And so I guess, I appreciate this. I appreciate the information. I know there's more to come afterwards, but I guess what I'd like to know is, so far, there's 7 of us and we're sitting here and we all have 7 different interpretations of what we're seeing. So what is the district telling us about what we're seeing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would love it if we could talk about that at the work session. So if you want initial reactions, I can just share my own personal maybe reactions right now, which is I'm like you, not surprised, but just as upset as I've been each time I've looked at our disaggregated data. And I think it speaks to the real need to, one, I think it reinforces some of the decisions the ESSER committee made about where do we need to target funds and how do we look at resources. This did not cause me to question any of those decisions. And I think it really at least gives me some energy for the work Dr. Vincent is leading around strategic planning and what is our 5-year plan and how are we going to ensure that we have intentional moves that are sustainable for us as a system that work to continue to make change. It gives me a lot of energy to partner with Dr. Jones on a lot of the different work that we were talking about. How do we keep critical consciousness moving? How do we keep some of those pieces that we've started to do the last few years going. And so So a mixture of frustration, but then ready to dig into the next steps in the process.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will look forward to talking more at the work session. All right, and our next teaching and learning update is translations, data, and process. We'll turn it over to Amy DeLashman and Shaylee Santiago.
Good evening.
Hello.
So translation communications, you heard a little bit about this from Eric. And initially some people may ask, why is translating communication so important? You heard from Eric tonight that as a district, we are committed to utilizing various ways to communicate with our constituents. But part of that is reaching a really diverse population in their preferred language. The school shutdown in 2020 probably brought this a bit more to light in what we needed to be doing. The communication was translated at that time, but perhaps that we just needed to put more emphasis and focus in that area. We're also federally required to provide translation and interpretation services to families. So the first step was really determining who's responsible, and a team of people were put together that included myself, also Shaylee, and the equity department, and also a large number of district translators working with this communication. Also, by providing our translated communication, I just want to remind that this does accomplish priority 4 in the district's priorities and goals, and that is clear and consistent communication to support positive and proactive community relationships. So when we think about a timeline, the obvious first step is really just to put a process in place. And that's what we did in July of 2020, really refining how this would look, how it would work, how we could utilize Infinite Campus to do what we needed it to do at the time. And then in August of 2020, we really launched this with the Return to Learn plans. So this process is not only for email communication, but it's also for any documents that are placed on our website. So the Return to Learn plans really needed to go through translators so that that information was out there in languages other than English. In September of 2020, the first translated email was sent through Infinite Campus. And that was district-wide communication only. So we started with the district-wide communication to really get the process down and learn from it, and then figure out how we could expand that going forward. So we had data. It didn't take long. So let's talk about the first 100 days after we did this. 74 messages were sent in the first 100 days. That's a cumulative total because we were sending in Spanish, Arabic, and Chinese. So that was 3 languages that we were sending. Also, the average turnaround time on those messages was 1.05 days. Our process states that we will do that within 1 to 2 school days. So we were keeping within those parameters that we already had in our process. As with any process, you learn as you go. And a couple of things that we really learned was we needed a tracking system for our translation needs. Shaylee and I initially started emailing each other back and forth. Well, if your email looks anything like our email looks some days, it's a little difficult to go back and figure out where things are and track down messages and where's that at. We very quickly learned there's got to be a better way. So we created a translations dashboard, and the dashboard is what we use to log what needs translated, where it's at, who it's been assigned to, It also is a way for us to provide some data in terms of the turnaround time to get things back out. We also learned that we needed a system capable of composing dynamic emails. Infinite Campus was doing the job for us, but we knew that there were some different things that we would be able to do. And also to handle translations in multiple languages and look at things like not just emails, but perhaps text messages, maybe the automated phone calls that go out. Was there a better way to do that? Were there different options available to us? So we looked at a lot of different mass messaging systems that were out there, but we decided ultimately to go with Blackboard. Blackboard checked every one of the boxes that we were looking for in a mass messaging system. Infinite Campus is still our student information system, so it did need to integrate with Student Campus, or with Infinite Campus. Also, translation options, so something that would be easier for us to utilize to get messaging out. Also, aesthetics. We wanted the ability to have some imaging within our messages, better branding, better styling in those messages. And Blackboard really checked all of those boxes for us. So when we go back to our timeline, we launched Blackboard after several months of testing and setting up, making sure things were working accurately. We sent the first Blackboard email in April of 2020. I'm sorry, that should say April of 2021. The first building email was translated in May of 2021. So we spent April doing some district messaging, but also training people within buildings to be able to send messaging at that level using Blackboard as well. And then in August, we decided this year in August, we would translate all emails that are going out through Blackboard. That was quite an undertaking for us, but we felt like we had about a year under our belt and we would be able to do this effectively by this time. So just a little bit about the process. It's really pretty simple in theory, but maybe a bit more difficult to explain. So I am copied on all of the emails that go out through the district using Blackboard. I then log that on our translations dashboard, make sure that Shaylee has the information to be able to assign a translator. We then, when it comes back from the translators, they log it on the dashboard. So we know again the turnaround time that that's taking. And then when work is complete, we send that messaging out through Blackboard. One change that we did make is that we are trying to send all of the translated pieces at one time versus it being individual. So not sending just a Spanish translation and then sending an Arabic translation. There is a way in Blackboard for us to send all the languages at the same time. So we're just trying to work more effectively, but yet still get messaging out very quickly to our families.
Excuse me, so presumably you have a group of families or individuals, whatever, who are classified by language. So you're sending all the languages, but you also are all the recipients of a given language get their message at the same time.
Correct. In Blackboard and through the registration process, we ask our families to let us know their preferred language for the communication that they're getting from the district. That is flagged. It's in Infinite Campus. It also pulls through to Blackboard. So we know exactly at a building level or at a district level what we need to be sending for any particular language translation. What I mean by that is at one building, we may not necessarily need an Arabic translation. So we're trying to be very effective in knowing exactly what we need without someone doing work that doesn't necessarily need to be done. So yes, we are able to get all of that data out of Blackboard. So I mentioned earlier that we do this for the website as well. It's really the same process that I detailed with email communication, and the time to translate is longer. We're talking about documents that can be upwards of 30, 40 pages. That's going to take a translator significant time to work through versus email communication. So those are not held to the 1 to 2 school day turnaround time. It does take just a little bit longer. We also denote these on our website with the language that they are translated in, and also the same wording that's listed in the link, just to make it a little bit easier to locate those. So let's get back to some data. We started using Blackboard and translating all of our communication August 1. And just to look at the volume of what is going on, we calculated from 36 weekdays. So I say weekdays because we're talking Monday through Friday. So 36 weekdays, this was August 1 through September 20th. 91 emails were sent in that time period. So that is district-wide and at the building level. That's a lot of communication. As a result of that, 194 translations were sent in that time period. We may have underestimated the volume that would come through in August. We've learned a lot, and we have great ideas for how we can change some things next time. But it was really great to see at a back-to-school time period, what volume would we be talking about? And this really helped us to learn and really grow from that as we go forward.
So within the 194, do you have just a rough idea of like breakdown per language a little bit? Like what are the top 3 or 4 languages that is like percentage wise or?
I don't have the percentages with me, but in terms of number of recipients, Spanish would be our first one. Second would probably, it'd be Arabic. And then third would be Chinese, just in terms of a volume of recipients that are receiving that communication.
And do you, of all these 194 translations, do you spot check with native speakers just to see that the translation is not clunky and weird? I mean, that it really reads fluently and makes sense?
So we're using our bank of interpreters and translators, and the majority of them are native speakers, so they're our experts. So we're not using like Google Translate or some other machine translation. It's actual people, and they are very meticulous about trying to make sure that the work that they do is understandable to families. I know one of our translators has said that she will work on a document and then she goes back and reads through kind of start to finish to make sure the flow is accurate and that she's capturing what the essence of the message is. Because as you may know with translation, there are cultural concepts that come through as well in the language, so you have to account for those also.
Good, I saw that little Google Translate symbol and it just made me wonder. Thank you.
Yeah, we're using actual people for the translation. So when you talk about what's next, Amy just mentioned the top 3 languages. Well, we noticed that there were a number of families who also preferred Vietnamese. And so just in the last month, in October, we were able to add Vietnamese as well. And so that was personally very exciting to be able to have another language. We don't need it at all the buildings at this point in time. So we're able to target which ones we have families that prefer that language for communication. Another thing that we've done is to template the translations. So for example, the COVID notifications and probably pretty soon the weather notices, a school delay or a snow day weather cancellation. So Amy puts together that information in advance. We have certain spots that will fill in the exact details. Translators have already done the work on it, and so then it makes it very smooth when we do have, say, a weather delay. The message can go out very quickly in all the languages simultaneously. It also allows for the phone calls, the automated phone calls, to be translated, and the emails. So that's been another thing that we've added on. And the feedback that we're getting from families has been positive as well. This is a quote from one family member who feels like now they're able to understand what the communication is. And so they are more interested in checking up on it as opposed to before when, you know, they're trying to read through in English and may not be able to grasp the complexity of what is shared. And so to go back to what Eric was saying earlier in his presentation about telling the stories, Eric and Amy had worked on a spotlight of one of our translators, Jingtao Wang, who also works as an EA at the middle school. She does Chinese and Japanese translation and interpretation for us. So you might have seen the article about her. In addition, there is a featured article in the Next Amazing magazine, so be watching for that. Really excited to see that come out and spread the word more about the work that we've been doing. So then I think we're to the final slide, so if you have any questions for us.
I don't really have any questions. I just want to thank you. This is awesome. I mean, absolutely awesome. It builds that cultural belonging. When you're able to read what your school is telling you, you matter. It is important for us that you know what's going on. I mean, it's invaluable. But the dignity that you're providing to the families, you probably don't even know yourself. So thank you so much. This is huge. Thank you.
I commend you on the work as well. Clearly that quote said it all. Question for you on your templated translations. Have you considered, I appreciate that was the question that was going on in my mind is, are there templated translations and things that you can be prepared for because you know they may be coming, so you see like with the weather. Have you considered at all about, unfortunately, I know Eric commented on there are some things that we have to communicate that are not as desirable but necessary, and any of the crisis situations in terms of the holds in place, are there any, I just wondered if you've considered doing any of those templated translations for any of those situations that may arise so families can have efficient. I know they're all different, so I get that, but I'm thinking about my experience as a family member when I received those in a timely manner, understanding that the district staff is working very hard to address the situation, but I just wondered if there was any efforts in pursuing anything there.
We've actually talked about that, Shaylee and I have, because each scenario is a little different and how we communicate that is also different.
Yeah.
We're trying to figure out how that might look without, the last thing that we want to do is send any communication that's confusing because we've lost something in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're really looking at what are those pieces of communication that we could potentially pre-prepare or maybe have templated. And that's one we've talked about. We just haven't gotten to that point yet.
I wonder, and I'm speaking as the experience of a parent, that the chart we have that describes the different things, even if you could have that translated in advance, so families, it's a reminder to you, because when you hear something, you forget as a parent, what are we in? But when you can look at the chart, it's okay, honey, it's your teachers are doing what they need. You know, I don't know if that would be, even having that chart as a reminder to be able to go out to help families understand it in that specific moment. So just a thought.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that. Our translators have translated the graphic.
Great.
And so when we send that communication, it's something that's there already that can go along with any translation.
Great. Thank you.
So I was trying to follow you because I'm sitting here thinking, we don't already do this? Like, don't we already do this? You told me we don't already do this? Is that what you're telling me?
In the past, we did more on a case-by-case basis, but not to this degree where every district email, every email from a building that's going out to families, all of those now are translated.
So I think what I was remembering is I pulled up the website because I remember when we made a big deal about putting a button on the choose your language, right? And that was a big deal. But I guess in my head, I just assumed that then all communications were being sent in the preferred language. Because I remember there was conversation about, because at the elementary, they send home all those pieces of paper, they're all different colors, like that those were translated in different languages, right? Is it?
I'm not sure exactly what all was happening at each of the different buildings. Different forms, for example, from the English Learner Program, we have access to a database for any of our notifications. So I can tell you that those were sent home in different languages, but consistently across the board, not to the degree that we're doing now.
So then what have those families been doing?
Sometimes there's a person in the community who serves as kind of an information source for them. A lot of times I would guess they muddle through, or they rely on the students to share whatever information they can. Yeah.
Well, thank you for then addressing that. I mean, clearly that was something that was needed, and I appreciate that it's being done. Thank you.
And this is a suggestion, okay, and I will stop it. But I was wondering if, like in the future for the next board, maybe you could do an interpreting. What is the method to get an interpreter? Because that would be the next piece to this, right? So just to plant that seed.
Yeah, I feel like we've got, that's why I feel like I'm surprised. I feel like I'm surprised that this wasn't being done, because I feel like we've had this conversation before, especially around conferences, right? And having someone at conferences, and I thought that we had it all together, but I guess there was this piece of it that we're still working on. And I guess I'm hearing that the text piece is still coming, because that's how I found out about the snow delays. Well, I get all three, right? So it is a process, and I'm thankful that, you're working on it. It is a big job.
I think parent-teacher conferences is one place that we were doing better. That's where we did use interpreters more consistently for a number of years. I mean, I've been in the district almost 20, and we've used interpreters to the best of our ability. Sometimes it's hard to get a particular language, for example, but communication like it's a huge step forward for us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you both so much. So I realized that I forgot to ask for any comments from the public after our update on the district communications plan. So we will take any comments from the public on the district communications plan or the teaching and learning update. And I see we have Steph Shares. You've been given permission to speak, and if you could just state your name and address.
Good evening. My comment is actually for the public forum. It's not specific to communications or to the teaching and learning update.
Thank you. Well, I don't see any other hands raised, so I can go ahead and open our public forum, and I will read our statement on public comments. Residents of the district, students attending the district, parents or guardians of students attending the district, and district staff members may address the board about any topic relevant to the district, whether on the current agenda or not. Those who wish to speak must sign up at the beginning of the meeting. Speaker participation is limited to 3 minutes once per item. The views and opinions of citizens addressing the board do not necessarily reflect those of the board, district administration, or staff. Speakers are to remember that Iowa law prohibits the board from discussing specific employees, students, or their performance. Student speakers will state their name and school. Others will state their name and address. And Steph Shares, you've been given permission to speak.
Okay, am I still unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Awesome. Good evening. My name is Steph Shares, and I live at 905 Vermont Circle and teach at Ames Middle School. Often, I come to speak as a member of a community group, but tonight, I speak only for myself. Last week, I received threats of violence from a man in Boone. The reason? Because I hosted an optional lunch book club for students featuring LGBTQ protagonists. I felt scared. I have a family. Would they be safe? In the midst of these worries, my administrator, Jonas Michael, stepped up to the plate. He showed the traits of a true servant leader. He stood beside me. He took these threats seriously and he made a plan so I feel prepared if this man attempts the harm he has threatened. Sexism, homophobia, racism, these threats are real and scary. Because of Jonas's strong leadership, I feel valued and, if not safe, at least prepared for what may come. My question to the board is simple. My administrator provided this support to me, but who is providing this support to Mr. Michael? On a broader scale, who is providing this support not just to Mr. Michael, but to other Black educators and leaders in this district? Equity is our number one priority. Part of equity is hiring and maintaining staff of color. Speaking up and standing beside staff as they experience racist attacks from those within the community, and as in the case of my threats, those outside the community, is necessary. So I close by asking one more time, how are you, as our elected district leadership, supporting our Black leaders in the face of racism? Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Steph. Riley Drake. You've been given permission to speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hey, thank you. My name is Riley Drake. I am a resident of Ames, and I'm speaking tonight on behalf of ARC of Ames, the Anti-Racism Collaborative of Ames. We've identified a number of concerns that represent troubling themes in the Ames Community School District and our community broadly. First, over the course of the past academic year, coordinated community attacks on anti-racist teaching, students with marginalized identities, and staff and administrators of color are a threat to the ACSD's stated priority, equity. Second, administrators, particularly those who are Black and/or women, especially those who act for equity, are far too frequently ostracized and forced out of their leadership roles in this district. While details of these departures are not made public, we know that district leadership who prioritize justice and hold marginalized identities are on the receiving end of brutal attacks of white supremacy and patriarchy. Administrators of color are being subjected to racist, threatening comments. Third, we are also aware of attacks against teachers who insist on the dignity of our LGBTQ community and students who are being targeted by community members who call for termination of their employment and worse, vigilante-style violence. Stability in our schools, especially among administrators and teachers who focus on equity or hold marginalized identities, is of paramount importance to our students. Ad hominem attacks by community members on ACSD employees, followed by the resignations of those employees, sends the message that bullies win. This message exacerbates instability among students who already enter school each day feeling unsafe or targeted because of oppressive conditions in schooling and society. We ask, therefore, how does district leadership support administrators and other educators who fight for justice? What is the district doing to prioritize the well-being and continued efforts of these educators? Where is the public condemnation of those who threaten, tell lies, and spread disinformation in an attempt to stall the district's equity efforts? And what of our responsibility as community members to these educators? How are we demonstrating accountability to and reciprocity for the justice-centered education that was progressing in this district only 1 year ago? We call for transformation not only in the Ames community, but by the Ames community. These patterns of violence that push out students and educators who are marginalized in and by schools are rooted in a historic system of exclusion and fear. Our community, especially those of us who espouse to seek out, speak out, and act upon educational injustices, must dig deeply into understanding these patterns and demand accountability of our school district and ourselves. Formal district leadership, including the ACSD superintendent and school board, must vocally condemn racialized attacks on district employees, support those administrators and educators who center equity, and develop transparent methods for sharing why administrators and faculty leave our district. And those of us who believe in equity must stand up and be heard. None of us can afford to be silent. Our children deserve better.
Thank you, Riley. Abdul Mohammed, you've been given permission to speak. You may just need to unmute yourself.
Here we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Good evening. My name is Abdullah Muhammad. I live at 316 Topaz Court. So looking at, going back to the ISASP data that we see very clear discrepancies, and we see low proficiency of Black and Brown students. But like Director Bacon said, I'm not surprised by the data either. And I'm extremely concerned and sometimes frustrated whenever I see these reports. So I've studied these same types of outcomes across several systems throughout my career. And my observation is that we have loads of data about the scope of the disparities for Black and Brown students, but the causes and the solutions seem really light on the protein. So what information does the district have, or what work is being done to assess the causes of these disparities? I mean, is the district digging deeper to see if, for example, there's a difference in proficiency level for students who are recent transplants to the district versus students who were raised, here for a while or something like that? Or, I feel like there are several questions that continue to go unanswered, or at least not really looked into more deeply. And so it seems like the help to really get a handle on the causes, it seems like we need more qualitative data also. So for instance, why are students disengaged? Someone has to know that answer, have to be studying that answer. Or what are the other contributing factors there might be? We hear lots of conversations about the results, but we hear very little, if nothing, about actual causes. And after all the years now that these type of data have been studied or presented, we don't seem to be moving any closer to improving the deficiencies. And we just keep reporting the same trends year after year. So I have two basic questions. The first one is, what is causing the disparities? I really feel like that parents need to understand that and be told that, and the district needs to be studying that. And secondly, how can the district actually impact these disparities if we don't know or aren't trying to truly determine the causes? So every semester that we don't get closer to the causes, we have students that are languishing in these deficiencies. And so there needs to be more work, I feel, done on assessing the causes. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdullah. Are there any other members of the public wishing to speak? And we did not have anyone sign up in person. So I will go ahead and close our public forum, and we will move on to our consent agenda.
I'm going to approve the consent.
Sorry.
I'm gonna pull something.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Okay, I remove approval of the consent items as presented, but pulling item number 4, the Hertzberg Consulting Agreement, please.
Second.
Moved by Franzen, seconded by Beerbaum to approve consent agenda while pulling item 4. And then we will, we vote on that? No, do we vote? We don't vote on that until the end, right?
So you'll move this item to the end of the action item.
Correct, yes. Okay, so we'll turn it over to Superintendent Vincent for gifts from the district.
Wait. So we didn't vote?
Because she has to say the gifts first, and then we'll vote.
And then we'll vote.
We'll discuss the item at the end of the action.
Included when you do vote.
But we didn't vote to approve the consent agenda.
We'll do that after gifts from the district, which is how we usually do. It's just.
Okay, because you seconded.
Yes.
And so then she can do that.
Correct.
But, so we don't have to vote to taking that one out?
Not on the consent agenda, correct, Chris?
I'm sorry.
We don't have to vote on the.
Removing the
removal of
item?
The item from.
No.
Okay.
We usually do that by gentleman's agreement.
Gentle ladies.
Personal
agreement. All right. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Well, again, the generosity of this community is amazing, and we have three gifts to recognize this evening. All of these this evening are cash gifts, which we are very grateful for. One from the Ames Home Builders Association, one from Cornerstone Church, and one from Matthew and Julie Clark. And again, with great appreciation, we receive these gifts.
Thank you. So it was moved by Franzen, seconded by Beerbaum to approve the consent agenda with removal of item 4. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. And we will move on to our action items. And first we have our policies for action.
I move the board approve the policies as presented.
Second.
Moved by Bankin, seconded by Franzen. Discussion?
Oh, sorry. Do you want me to let Chris explain the difference on whichever one it was?
If you recall,
710.
Director Benkin had a question on policy 710.4 meal charges. And she was saying some language had gotten removed. The language had gotten removed because I went with the ISB language, so the language had been no child will be denied a meal, and the ISB language was that a child shall be allowed to charge a meal if they have a negative account, which I thought was a little more positive way of saying it, but it's also what happens legally. Iowa law says every student gets a meal. Federal law says you still charge them based on their eligibility. So that policy got passed pretty quickly after that Iowa law change, and I'm not sure ISB even had a sample at that point. So we didn't remove the language, we just changed how it was worded.
Anything else on policies for action? All right, it was moved by Bankin, seconded by Franzen. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. And request to SBRC for modified allowable growth for increasing enrollment and limited English proficiency instruction beyond 5 years.
I move to approve the request to the School Budget Review Committee for modified allowable growth for one-time funding for increasing enrollment of $971,357.10.
Second.
Moved by Beerbaum, seconded by Acker. Discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0.
I move to approve the request to the School Budget Review Committee for modified allowable growth for limited English proficiency instruction beyond 5 years in the amount of $64,927.17.
Second. Moved by Beerbaum, seconded by Colton. Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. Board and staff items.
Hold on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Here, I'll make a motion. I move we approve the 2021-22 ACSD Hertzberg Consulting Agreement as presented in the consent items.
Second.
Moved by Franzen, seconded by Acker. Discussion?
I just wonder, Superintendent Vincent, if you could provide some information. I know that there's information in our documents, but if you could help all of us understand what this agreement is.
Yeah.
I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
This is hopefully an exciting opportunity to respond to some of the needs that we continue to see in our district in terms of shifting populations and the need to study and consider, are there pieces we need to add to our array of ways that students can learn. particularly the pressures in the middle school and the high school. We have students making us aware in many ways that perhaps our pretty traditional approach in our settings isn't best meeting their needs. It's difficult, as you know, to take on a study of this type of scope alongside your other administrative type responsibilities. And we've had requests from both our current middle school administration as well as our high school to say, can we look at ways to get more engaged with things like project-based learning? Do we have a need for alternative learning settings? Do we have a need for some settings both within our schools and external to our schools? This would allow someone to bring their expertise in mental health and in working with the Iowa STEM Council over many years to help conduct that study with us and on behalf of our administrators and our faculty. So that's the hope behind it. You see some broad phases. You know, we really need to get stakeholders engaged to help refine and put more meat on those broad stages. But the hope would be that as it moves along, reports could come back to the board to say, here's where we are, here's what we're thinking, because it will have implications. And I don't know if these timelines are accurate or not. It's a fairly robust timeline, but it does seem like there is a need to at least study what else we might do that responds to that broad array of needs that we see within the system.
Thank you for that explanation.
So then looking at this, like during that kind of second phase, there probably would be some presentation of the board, like in February, March, or some updated documents.
I would expect probably in each of the chunks.
Okay, that was a big question I had too, was kind of how are we going to see how this is progressing?
Yeah. And I would think as those early participants are formed, there may be some interest, you know, in the organizational meeting. This may even be a group that a board member would want to be aligned with. That all has to be determined. But it's a fairly significant consideration. So as often as you'd like to see an update, I think that is a very reasonable expectation.
Any other discussion? Okay, it was moved by Franzen, seconded by Acker to approve the Hertzberg Consulting Agreement. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. And now we will move on to our board and staff items. I did not note any requests for staff this meeting, so I will go ahead and turn it over to the board for any items from the board.
I have an item, but it's not going to be long, but it's not going to be short. So I guess I'll go last if somebody has something else to say.
I guess the one thing I'd say is I just welcome the new school board members and I see in the audience and look forward to seeing them in 2 weeks when we make you come up here. So enjoy.
Yeah. And I would like to note, in that vein, this is my final meeting with the board, and I'm really appreciative of the time that I have spent with you these past few months. Thank you for letting me sit in, and I certainly look forward to wonderful things happening with the new board and wish you every success going forward. Thank you.
And we have a little parting gift for you. So
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane, for being willing
Of
to fill
course.
this role. We really
It's been a privilege. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, I guess it's me. Okay, so I wrote this down so that I wouldn't get off track. So I'm going to read, but it's my last whole meeting as well. And so I wanted to share some thoughts. So what to say about my time on the board. When I was running for office, I was vaguely aware of the academic disparities in our district. After becoming elected and sitting in this seat for 4 years, these disparities now populate my thoughts every day. I understand them now in a way that I couldn't before. And unfortunately, I have to say that I leave this role without hope that they will be addressed adequately anytime soon. I say that because after all this time, after all these presentations, work sessions, incidents, etc., I still don't think the district gets what is truly at the heart of them. My mind frequently goes back to a passage from Between the World and Me, the award-winning book from acclaimed Black writer Ta-Nehisi Coates. In his memoir, Coates writes to his son about a time he was being interviewed on national TV. The host's final question was about Coates' hope for America while showing a picture of a Black child hugging a white police officer. Coates says when the host asks him the question, it was like she was asking him to wake her from a dream. He says, I've seen this dream all my life. It is perfect houses with nice lawns. It is Memorial Day cookouts, block associations, and driveways. The dream is tree houses and Club Scouts. The dream smells like peppermint but tastes like strawberry shortcake. And for so long, I wanted to escape into the dream, to fold my country over my head like a blanket. But this has never been an option because the dream rests on our backs, the bedding made from our bodies. And knowing this, knowing the dream persists by warring with the known world, I was sad for the host. I was sad for all those families. I was sad for my country, but above all in that moment, I was sad for you. What Coates is talking about is that we live in two worlds. For many white people, America is one thing, but for many Black and brown people, America is something different. And it's that steadfast desire to hold on to the myth of America that makes it difficult for Black and brown people to be seen and heard. As a member of this community and this school board, I have seen too many people living in this dream. I saw it when I was running for office and an administrator was presenting on academic disparities to our district. When speaking about academic disparities in our Black student population, she said, quote, "You have to remember these children weren't raised the same way we were." No one on the board batted an eye as she continued to blame Black students and their families for the disparities in her presentation. This trope was echoed by a recent candidate for the very seat I am sitting in during the most recent school board election. Very few people batted an eye. After I was elected, one of the first issues that came to my attention was that the N-word had been sprayed across a set of lockers in the boys' locker room at the high school. I was upset that nothing was being done about this. I was invited to meet with district leadership so that I could explain what I was so upset about and what they could do to better understand the harm that was done. After pouring into these leaders for an hour, I was told that nothing could be done about it because people had the right to free speech. I knew then that our Black and brown students were not safe in this district. Shortly thereafter, the board received an email from a group of parents titled, quote, "Merry Christmas from ACSD parents." It talked about how equity was okay to a point, but that the district needed to keep its sights on those who could be saved because not everyone was going to graduate. Equity was a waste of time. Math wasn't racist, and, quote, "illegal aliens shouldn't be in our schools anyway." No one batted an eye. Fast forward to graduation that year, I was excited to serve on the stage for graduation. My excitement faded as soon as Jamette entered the auditorium, and I saw that she had been given only a robe while the rest of us were given academic hoods to wear. When I asked why Jamette was being treated differently, I was told that hoods were reserved only for those who had graduated from college. I asked why that was the rule, since hoods are only given to those who earn master's degree or above, and I was the only board member at the time with an advanced degree on the stage. I wanted to know why an exception was being made for everyone else except Jamette. The only response I received was the opportunity to work with the then principal of the high school to design identical robes for all school board members that we wear from that point forward. I appreciated that opportunity, even though I still wonder why it had to come to that and why, again, no one else on the board or the district batted an eye. Since then, we've lived through our students making monkey sounds at Black players on another team during a basketball game and not face any punishment. A former administrator looking at disparity data, covering the time they had responsibility for the high school, and opining about how they would just never be able to understand who was responsible for the disparities. We've lived through an administrator telling me that it was good that my kids were biracial because their white side would ensure that they could achieve academically. And a trusted adult being allowed to return to our district after using the N-word twice in a confrontation with students. And these are just a few of the overt acts of racism I have experienced while serving on this school board. I won't even bother with all the microaggressions for the past 4 years, lest we be here all night. The reason I leave this board without much hope is that I have, time and time again, seen this board and this district fail to bat an eye with regard to overt racism. In fact, I have, time and time again, seen them bend over backwards to accommodate overt racism, either by ignoring it or excusing it, from my first day to my last, all while proclaiming their desire for educational equity. In my 4 years, I have seen the district ignore the recommendations that came out of the Equity Committee's equity report. The recommendations from the equity audits for every single school in this district have also been ignored, as have the constant requests from community groups to provide regular updates on what the district is doing to address these disparities. All have been ignored, even as we read the purpose statement at the start of every meeting. I have seen high-paid administrators do everything in their power to dismiss, diminish, and obscure data on our practices and their outcomes to avoid making meaningful structural changes. I have seen people prioritize widely held myths about police in our schools over evidence to the contrary. I have seen this district misuse restorative circles to protect adults while never having thought to do so before punishing our Black and brown children. I am hearing about the budding use of alternative learning rooms populated with majority Black and brown children, when I asked the district months ago what it was going to do to ensure that this very thing did not happen. I do believe that the district wants to address the academic disparities. I truly do. But that will never happen until everyone in this room right now realizes that they are part of the reason they exist. We are the dreamers that Coates is referring to. We can only wag our finger at the community or our legislators for so long. The call is coming from inside the house, as the young people say. I realize that saying all of this makes me sound bitter. Maybe I am. Who wouldn't be? I leave this position disappointed at the countless times this district and board have fumbled the ball. The many times we have had unforced errors on issues that were really low-hanging fruit. The many times we exalted our sadness about the state of education in our district and still ignored the data and reports that we asked for. And most importantly, the times we actively engaged in prioritizing saving face over what needed to be done to protect our Black and brown students. That's part of why I'm making this statement. It would have been easier to just talk about peppermint and strawberry shortcake. Surely I have had those moments on the board, but to turn away from these other parts would be a lie. It would be my complicity in prioritizing saving face over the truth. But it's not all doom and gloom. I appreciate having my eyes open. Perhaps I was a dreamer once, but there can be no change unless we acknowledge our reality. So for me, at least, I plan to continue advocating for an equitable learning environment, and I'm grateful to be able to do so with my eyes wide open. I don't care how many Black Lives Matter Week of actions you undertake, or how many books you buy with characters of color in them, or how many awards you win. Until you wake up from your dream, nothing will change. If someone asked me to give an honest assessment of the district right now, it would be that we are a district that wants things to be better, but for nothing to change. We have one hand reaching for the future, while the other is tightly gripping the past. There is no shame in this, except for failing to realize that is what is happening. The district is at a critical point in its journey. If my final act as a school board director is to push you off the diving board because I know you really can't swim, then here is your kick. Off you go. My final request is that you print off the academic disparities by subgroup, frame them, and place them right next to your equity awards. I also ask you to remember the awards are the dream. The persistent disparities are the reality. And I ask you to remember that your dream is a nightmare for students of color. I can only hope that you all wake up soon. But I know that you won't. So here are some of my other parting suggestions. Number one, review your equity professional development efforts. When I look at where we are today, after 5 years of heavy investment in equity-related professional development, I am not impressed. Either it's not working or we have too many employees who are learning resistant. Please stop investing in efforts that are not yielding results. Number two, fire profusely. I know that much has been made about the turnover in the district. In my opinion, some of the people who have left throughout the years should have been gone a long time ago or never hired in the first place. In any regard, the district will never make any progress until it cleans house. So as they say in the military, fire away. Number three, listen to Anthony. One of my greatest accomplishments has been working with others on the board and the district to create the district's inaugural equity office. I see the district using it heavily when the media spotlight is on us, but less willing to engage that office when the heat isn't on. Anthony and Jessica are fantastic resources. In my opinion, they should be at the right hand of the superintendent until we see some real, meaningful progress on our disparities. Number four, for incoming board members, it will take you about 2 years to find your footing, but the need for you to call out practices that seem odd or concerning is needed immediately. This community elected you to continue leading the charge for educational equity. At this point, that work mostly consists of someone being brave enough to stand up and say, hey, what's wrong with us? Can't we do better than this? In a room full of people who are otherwise smiling and patting themselves on the back. Please be that person with the courage to do this. Thank you for listening, and good luck to the board and the district moving forward.
Thank you, Director Benkin, for sharing your thoughts. And I know I personally have learned so much from you and appreciated your mentorship and leadership and your perspective over the years. And I know we will be sorely missing that. So I really do look forward to continuing to hear from you in the future. Any other items from the board?
Monique, that was bracing. You did not hold back. And I think it was, people might dispute parts of what you had to say, but it's powerful food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. All right, we will move on to our items from the superintendent.
Just a few quick comments. Our communications department helped coordinate with the Chamber of Commerce last week with the Ames leadership class, and it seems like that was very well received in terms of individuals that are interested in the community, being able to learn about different aspects of the school. So thanks and kudos to Eric and all those that were involved. There were many directors involved providing overviews as well. Just a note to know work that's going forward that will be critical for many of our families, but also for the board to be aware of. The calendar group is getting organized by Dr. Hawkins, and we are encouraging a hope that we can develop at least a 2-year calendar so there can be some predictability as we move forward, always reserving the opportunity to adjust as needed when that next year gets closer. Again, Director Schmidt and I have started a round of building visits. I wish all of you could duplicate that too. Just listening to our staff about what they are excited about and what their challenges are. We are trying to keep running records of what they say so that we can get some themes together. We've completed 2, and of course we have several more to go, but really appreciate their honesty with what's working. They are so clearly dedicated on trying to meet student needs, even while they have very distinct challenges that they've highlighted, many of those related, of course, to the staff shortages that we have. So stay tuned on that. I would add my appreciation to that already expressed to Jane for stepping in over this interim time. I know it is a challenging task for board members, and her background allowed her to step right in. So thank you very much for that. And then finally, we'd just like to say thanks to the community and to all of those who were willing to participate in this last board election. It takes courage to put yourself out there, and not everyone, when you have 7 members running or 7 individuals running for 3 seats, not everyone will have that opportunity. But to all 7, we appreciate that. As public schools, we can't do our work without the involvement of the community. And obviously the community also participated in high numbers. For those that weren't elected, I would just put out the invitation that there is plenty of work to be done. And you just heard some of those big challenges Director Benkin reminded us of. And anyone that is interested, there are places, there are committees, there are places you can be very actively involved, and we would invite that. We need the range of voices at the table. So those are all the comments that I have at this time.
Thank you. All right, we will take a look at our board planning calendar. It's a little bit up in the air right now because we may or may not be adding an additional work session in early December. But our next meeting will be November 22nd, which will be our organizational meeting where we will seat our new board members and say farewell to our exiting board members. One other thing I realized I forgot to mention earlier with regard to the superintendent search, you won't be seeing a lot on the calendar for a while now. The search firm is in their recruitment phase. They are working hard, reaching out to all of the individuals that were suggested and asking them for recommendations and making lots and lots of phone calls, marketing and doing all of those things to pull together the best pool of candidates possible for us. So we're kind of in a quiet phase for our part, and then we will kick right back up again in early January. All right, and with that, we will take a 5-minute break and we will move into our work session. And we will also, we will not be broadcasting the work session, so we'll end our Zoom broadcast